the wrong game died. If you started off playing in Call of Duty Warzone, you may think that Call of Duty Warzone was Call of Duty's first battle royale. But of course, if you've been around longer than that, you know that that's not true. But it was its first truly successful battle royale. Now, Call of Duty Blackout did come out to a lot of praise, and it, of course, at its time had a ton of issues as well, as with any new game, especially the first time that a game reaches into a brand new genre and attempts to redefine it inside of its own parameters. But I'm here to tell you today that I think the wrong one is the one that succeeded. So as much time as I've put into Warzone, and originally the first Warzone obviously was a bit of a masterpiece, even though it also had its major flaws. I think overall that most people can agree that the first iteration of Warzone, even through most of its flaws, maintained most of its levels of fun. Whereas once we've reached the Warzone 2.0 era and forward, we've ran into more issues that are reoccurring than we've had in ways that the game has gotten better. Now, of course, they have been playing from the back foot from the very beginning of Warzone 2.0, and we have to applaud them for their efforts, but we still also have to acknowledge that there's been a recurring list of problems, bugs, and issues that have not been resolved. But one of the things that I got to do is I re-downloaded Blackout, and I started running around the map again, and after a little bit of time of just running around the map, I've come to the conclusion that I think the game that we really deserve is closer to Blackout than it is to Warzone 2.0. Now, if we think back to some of the biggest pressure points that we've had through most of Call of Duty Warzone's experiences, Warzone 1 all the way up to 2.0 into the Warzone quote-unquote 4 era, the biggest issues we've had to begin with is non-evolving metas. So with Warzone, we got access to the idea of these loadouts, the idea you could build your loadout, take it in, and fight with it. And it became a big cornerstone of the way that we approach the game. But it also created some of the largest glaring issues that we've had inside the game as well. Because in the years, we've had stagnant metas that stayed around for 2, 3, 4, 5 months at a time. Even the most recent Blackout 6 has had a very stale meta that the XM4 finally just got nerfed, and so this is the first time we've really seen change in it, and it's nearly 6 months later. It's one of those things that the game doesn't evolve quick enough because these loadouts become meta, and the meta loadouts stay for way too long, even though the developers, of course, have vowed to try to make a more ever-changing meta. Well, that's not a case that ever happens inside of Blackout, because just like a traditional battle royale, something like a PUBG or a Fortnite, you find your weapons on the ground, you find the attachments, and those are the weapons that you're going to run. There is no buying loadouts and trying to get the quote-unquote meta weapon from those. So it was a simpler time because it was a much more straightforward choice. You learned to fight with the weapons you had, with the attachments you had, and won with what you had, in a, again, very traditional battle royale sense. That meant that not only were you forced to have to actually get good with one weapon, but if you were defeated by a player that had a worse gun, then you just knew they were a better player, rather than relying on a crutch of having their loadout or not. Also, Blackout had a massive difference from Warzone in the fact that there was no way to get your teammates back, really. There was none of this continuous resurging over and over again, making the idea of a battle royale get watered down. There was either survival or failure. And though we've played a lot of time and they've gone further and further into the idea of the resurgence, especially when they start dealing with the actual resurgence mode on Rebirth Island or any other resurgence maps, the big map has slowly over time just evolved into a gigantic resurgence mode, whereas Blackout really fostered that idea of battle royale significantly more than something of the modern Warzone. So in my eyes, battle royales are much closer to the Blackout feel than they ever were in the Warzone feel. The idea that you could buy back your teammate in Warzone was a very cool idea that was implemented pretty much to ensure that players got more time to play and spent less time spectating. And while that is a cornerstone feature of the game now, I do feel like Blackout does a very good job in maintaining that true battle royale feel. and I don't know if people would really even enjoy it anymore because of the fact that they may get taken out early and be forced to have to sit. But that survival requirement inside of a battle royale has always been part of the thing that makes battle royales so just adrenaline racing, and it's probably why Warzone has lost a bit of its feel over the years, is because there has become less and less of a punishment for being defeated. But that's not to say that Blackout didn't have a direct effect over the way that we approached Warzone when it first came out. The developers obviously took a lot of just ideas from what Blackout was doing and of course tried to put it into Warzone as well. The healing mechanics and even the original vests that were in part of Warzone 2.0 were directly inspired by the way that Blackout went with the original vest systems inside of Blackout. You had the ability to have a 1, 2, or 3 plate vest in Blackout, which is something that we saw return inside Warzone 2.0, and the healing system as well. The one thing that never really recovered from Blackout's transition into Warzone, though, was the overall clarity of the game. You're seeing behind you right now me running around the map on Blackout. The map itself was significantly brighter, a lot more vivid, and the player stuck out a lot more. I've been playing other battle royales a lot more recently, and games like Fortnite and PUBG both do an exceptional job of making players visible, while it seems like Warzone has really always suffered from visual clarity. Whether it's their filters that they're putting over top of the characters, or they're removing backlighting on some of their all blacked out characters, because we've never learned from that one yet, there is seemingly no way that you can improve the lighting inside of Warzone. At least that's the way they act. But if you look behind me, there is Blackout, and everything is so vivid, so vibrant, and everything is a lot easier to see. From the loot on the ground all the way to the enemy players that you would be fighting against, Blackout had a way of at least showing you where you were fighting. Now, Blackout did have some issues on the release that persisted way longer than they probably should have. They did attempt to shoehorn in the operator's abilities, like the 9-bang, which if you're not familiar with it, that was 9 flashbangs in one toss. And it was extremely disruptive. It was to the point where if you didn't have 9 bangs, you were probably going to lose the final circle fight because you were just going to get absolutely rinsed by a ton of them. And of course, the 1, 2, and 3 plate systems, they did not work in Warzone just as much as they pretty much didn't work in Blackout. Because one of the issues you ran into frequently was if you had a 2-plate system and you ran into someone with a 3-plate system, it was game over, because the 3 plates for some reason just had so much more survivability than the 2-plate system did. And that is what we ran into again in Warzone 2.0, was if you didn't have a 3-plate system, for the majority of the time you were going to lose to anybody of a similar skill value as you. But overall, Blackout did most of everything significantly better. Blackout introduced all of the swimming mechanics, which we ended up losing by the time we got to Warzone. It had all of the boats, vehicles, and it had significantly more interesting POIs than almost anything we've seen in Warzone 2.0 and forward. Because, much like the original Warzone, Blackout was one of the maps that took the advantage of pre-existing maps and slamming them together. As you run around on the Blackout map, you actually will recognize multiple maps from the Black Ops series, and you will be able to actually remember how to navigate them, allowing players that familiarity, very similar to the first Warzone, in the way that they can navigate maps that they were familiar with while still keeping a really neat tie-in to the map itself. Something that I think Blackout has probably done better than all of the other maps, and I would even say that Blackout does it better than Verdansk. If you never got a chance to play on Blackout's map, you may have been missing out on one of the best designed BR maps to date. But ultimately, Blackout did fail at the end because of a few things that seem minor but ended up being very major in the way that the game was developed. First off, it was tied into Black Ops, so it was a no longer free-to-play battle royale that people have always become accustomed to now, that are no longer tied into games, but more specifically were a standalone that was tied in thematically with the games around it. Something that Warzone went on to improve on. And the other issue was that, unfortunately enough, it didn't really have the following or the backing for it to be potentially a continuous thing like Warzone did. And even the first Warzone was never intentionally supposed to be added on continuously. There are rumors that a Blackout 2 was supposed to come out around the time that we ended up with Verdansk 84 from the Black Ops Cold War era. But instead, because of the overwhelming success of Warzone, we received a tack on to Warzone. And that has been the model for Warzone ever since, where they just add on whatever game is being released and then just hoping that it sticks. But something like Blackout, if it could come out, be its own standalone title, and then receive new weapons and new characters from the series, and be its own standalone title, I think could be even larger than Warzone is right now. And of course, we'll never run into another COVID era, hopefully, fingers crossed, but we'll never see those numbers that Warzone ever was. But I think that a Blackout style battle royale from Call of Duty could do significantly better on not only remedying a lot of the issues inside of the Call of Duty Warzone era, but it could also usher in a brand new set of players, skill values, and ultimately a brand new set of fun for a very quickly staling battle royale genre.